LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup for November 29th. Thanks for joining me. I've picked out 26 of the weekend's best clips for what I think should be a really informative show for you all tonight. As usual, my clips come almost completely from the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets of CBS, NBC, ABC, CNN, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I also have one clip from last Friday, also from CNN, from the Situation Room during the breaking news about the Planned Parenthood shooting, or the Planned Parenthood clinic shooting in Colorado Springs, Colorado. That's one of the two big topics I'll be covering tonight. You can see all the topics listed down in the video description. And if you're watching this as a recorded show, I should put time indexes down there so that you can click to the topics that most interest you. Also, down in the video description, I've put a link to a PDF of this clip list that I put together. These are the 26 clips in order that I will be referring to during the show. And if you can make any sense of my notes, then you'll know what I'm going to be talking about. And anyway, some people seem to like to download those. Like I said, I'll have two big topics, two small topics listed. They're listed down in the video description. The Planned Parenthood shooting will be the first big topic for the show. That'll be followed by the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race with clips from Donald Trump and Ben Carson and Governor John Kasich of Ohio, and there's at least one other presidential candidate in there. But the two small topics at the end will then be one quick clip on the end of NSA bulk phone record collection, and then a couple clips at the end about the upcoming climate summit in Paris and how it's been overshadowed by the terrorism issue. I won't have any political comedy clips for you tonight because Bill Maher is off. HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher is off until next January 15th, and then this week Saturday Night Live on NBC was off. So instead of giving you actual political comedy, I'm going to give you just you have to laugh unless you want to cry kind of comedy from the Republican reaction to the Planned Parenthood clinic shooting in Colorado Springs, Colorado. I already made one video about the Fox News bias in failing to report the part of the Planned Parenthood of Rocky Mountain Planned Parenthood statement about the poisonous environment, or fueling extremists, the rhetoric and poisonous environment fueling extremists for domestic terrorism. But another clip I almost made an edited, narrated, scripted video out of was Adam Kinzinger on CNN's The Situation Room last Friday, with host Brianna Keilar, who was filling in for Wolf Blitzer, and she actually also, you'll see, filled in for Jake Tapper on CNN State of the Union this morning. Well, Brianna Keilar had on this Republican Adam Kinzinger, and even while the shooter was still active, before he was taken into custody, he took the opportunity to attack Planned Parenthood and also Planned Parenthood's policies in a way that you'll see is copied by some of the Republicans that were on the shows this morning. But first, here's like the most egregious example from Adam Kinzinger talking to Brianna Keilar on CNN's The Situation Room last Friday in this clip.
I want to really just stipulate here that we're unsure if Planned Parenthood was targeted here. We don't know if that's the motive. But when we're looking at the statement, Congressman, that's coming to us from the regional director of Planned Parenthood there, she brings up the possibility about what she calls extremists that are creating a poisonous environment that feeds domestic terrorism in this country. So we see someone making the leap there. Again, we don't know if Planned Parenthood has been targeted, but at the same time, we've seen Planned Parenthood clinics targeted before. I mean, what does that say to you about perhaps some of the protections that should be provided for safety in areas like this?
Yeah, when I heard that statement, I thought that was very premature. We may find out that this person was targeting Planned Parenthood. If we find out that he was not targeting Planned Parenthood, I would fully expect an apology from the Planned Parenthood director for saying that. But regardless, if somebody is targeting Planned Parenthood, it's not indicative of what folks that are opposed to some of the practices Planned Parenthood commits, how we feel. You know, we saw these barbaric videos, and that was something that many of us have a legitimate concern about. That doesn't mean that we're going to take guns and walk into Planned Parenthood clinics. Obviously, this is a person that has a mental health issue that's to some level psychotic and crazy. And if he's targeting Planned Parenthood, and again, we don't know, if he is, he has taken a legitimate disagreement with a practice and turned it into an evil response, which is to go in and shoot people. But again, we don't know that answer yet, and I'm sure we'll be finding out shortly.
All right.
So, yeah, that was the attack on Planned Parenthood by Representative Adam Kinzinger while Planned Parenthood was still being attacked by this gunman. And this is before we knew that he had made some rambling statement afterwards about no more baby body parts or, well, I'm going to show you a couple news reports on this. First, I'll start with the Fox News report, which they at least did report that this gunman had talked about no more baby body parts, but they kind of put that right in the middle. That one of the things you learn when you study the art of persuasion and public speaking is that if you want your audience to remember something, you put it at the beginning or you put it at the end. And if you don't want them to remember something, you stick it right in the middle of what you're saying, because people have primacy and recency memory. But the stuff in the middle, not so much. And you'll see right in the middle of this report from Will Carr on Fox News Sunday, they mentioned the fact that there may have been an anti-abortion motive here, but then they end up concentrating on the police officer and some of the other facts, as you'll see when you watch that clip over here.
Shooting at a Planned Parenthood center in Colorado Springs is renewing debates over abortion and gun control. But while a suspect is in custody, it's still unclear what motivated him to open fire. We'll talk with presidential candidate Fiorina in a moment. But first, Fox News correspondent Will Carr is live outside the clinic. Will.
Chris, while Robert Louis Deere is set to appear in court on Monday, the big question is, why did he kill 3 people and injure 9 others? This weekend, authorities have been searching his trailer in nearby Park County, Colorado, looking for clues. Keep in mind that Deere surrendered on Friday, and now there are multiple reports that he's been rambling in interviews with investigators, at one point saying, quote, "No more baby parts," which appears to refer to recent videos allegedly showing Planned Parenthood officials discussing the sale of fetal body parts. Investigators digging into Deere's past after they say he stormed the Planned Parenthood behind me with an assault weapon and got into a shootout with police on Friday. He previously lived in a cabin in North Carolina that had no electricity or water and had passed arrest for domestic violence and animal cruelty. Those who knew him best say he kept to himself and he never spoke about religion or abortion. At the same time, one of his victims, Officer Garrett Swayze, is being remembered as a father, an athlete, and a man of God.
If I can put it in a nutshell, I think he was a person who served this community with integrity, served with his whole life. I think he meant hope to this community.
President Obama issuing a statement in part which says enough is enough in regards to gun violence, and at the same time, Attorney General Lynch calling this a crime against women who use Planned Parenthood for health care services. Chris.
Will Carr reporting.
So, yeah, that was the Fox News report, and they did mention the no more baby body parts statement in the middle there, but, you know, it was in there, although I noticed they said this thing about how none of the people who knew him said that he had mentioned anything about being anti-abortion or anti-Planned Parenthood or anything about religion. But you'll see in the next couple reports, they both mention, they have this clip from one of his neighbors back in North Carolina or South Carolina, wherever, I think it was South Carolina, but one of the Carolinas. And in that report, the guy talks about how when he first met this guy, he was already giving him anti-Obama literature, which somehow that didn't make it into the Fox News report. But here it is from the ABC reporter, Clayton Sandell, on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, after, I think there's an introduction from Martha Raddatz over here.
Good morning, Martha. Investigators here are trying to piece together the facts here this morning, but also trying to get inside the mind of an alleged killer. This morning, law enforcement sources are not officially saying why they think Robert Deere allegedly launched a 5-hour attack.
CSPD is working an active shooter.
But they do say after his surrender and arrest in Colorado Springs, he allegedly made rambling, hostile statements about his target, Planned Parenthood.
We're pinned down. We're active gunfire.
On Saturday, police and federal agents showed up to his remote trailer home in Hartselle, Colorado, 90 minutes away, where neighbors say Deere kept to himself, but always seemed a little off.
We got some anti-Obama pamphlets. That was just kind of weird with like 3 minutes of meeting somebody. They're already wanting to give you that kind of stuff.
U.S. Attorney General Loretta Lynch calls the shooting a crime against women receiving health care at Planned Parenthood. The organization itself says the gunman was motivated by opposition to safe and legal abortion.
It happened at a Planned Parenthood center.
What does that tell you?
My suspicions is that that has a lot to do with the motive.
But knowing the motive won't bring back 3 victims. One, a 44-year-old University of Colorado police officer, Garrett Swayze, a married father of 2, once a champion junior ice skater.
He wanted to be in the Olympics and he wanted to make a mark.
The 2 other people killed still haven't been officially identified. 9 more were wounded but expected to be okay. Others just feeling lucky.
And I saw myself in the mirror and it's like, my God, he was aiming for my head.
Now, law enforcement sources tell us the Department of Justice considers this a case of domestic terrorism, but state murder charges will take first priority. We are also told Deere is talking to investigators, sometimes rambling, other times sounding perfectly rational, but they say they may never understand his motive or mental state. He'll be in court on Monday. Martha?
So yeah, that was the ABC report, and it had that clip of the neighbor saying that this shooter at the Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs had given out anti-Obama literature, and it also talked about the no more baby body parts and rambling statements and sometimes coherent statements. It was definitely a lot more comprehensive than what you saw on Fox News, which seemed much more spun to play down the anti-abortion, anti-Planned Parenthood part. And, you know, the one thing I hated about that Fox News clip was the way they talked about the allegations that Planned Parenthood sold baby body parts. I mean, those allegations are based on edited videos that the unedited videos don't really support those allegations at all. There's no real credible allegations against Planned Parenthood, but those allegations will show up again in some of the Republican candidate statements I'll show in a minute. First, I want to show how State of the Union's, this is Brianna Keilar again, who, as I said before, was guest hosting for Jake Tapper on State of the Union. She started off the State of the Union program the same way Jake Tapper's been doing it, where she uses some adjective just to describe what the State of the Union is, and she says the State of the Union is tragic because of the Planned Parenthood shooting, and then she goes into a short summary of the facts from Colorado Springs, and even though it's much shorter than the Fox News story, it actually includes this neighbor saying that the shooter had these anti-Obama views over in this clip.
Filling in for Jake Tapper in Washington with the state of our union is tragic. Baby parts, that is the phrase investigators say the shooter used after surrendering at this Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs. Robert Louis Deere, who killed 3 people and injured 9 others, told police he had anti-abortion and anti-government views. His most recent address was this trailer in the desolate mountain community of Hartselle, Colorado, where his neighbors say people go to be left alone.
Talking to us and everything. Gave us some anti-Obama flyers, little pamphlets, and I didn't even really read them.
Before moving to Colorado, he lived here in this remote cabin in North Carolina, and his police records in the Carolinas include complaints about animal abuse, as well as an accusation that he was a peeping Tom. He will appear in court on Monday to face charges. I spoke about this attack with...
So, yeah, that was the CNN introductory report, and it also included the clip of the neighbor from North Carolina saying that the shooter had these anti-Obama views that somehow didn't make it into the Fox News Sunday program. And then the next clip I want to show is also from Fox News Sunday. They did a little teaser for this in the last clip I showed, that Carly Fiorina, who was definitely spreading all these falsehoods about Planned Parenthood and said something that was demonstrably false at one of the big Republican debates and would never correct herself or admit that she had described something that never actually happened at a Planned Parenthood. And anyway, she was over on Fox News Sunday, and of course she condemned the violence and called the shooter a madman or something close to that. But she also used it as an opportunity to put in a few more digs against Planned Parenthood, claiming that they were selling baby body parts, and they've even admitted it because they're not going to take money for body parts anymore, even though what Planned Parenthood actually did is said that they're not going to take compensation for the costs, which is legal. Selling for profit is not legal, but taking compensation for the cost is legal, and they're not even going to do that anymore. But you'll see how Carly Fiorina twists that around in her answer to Chris Wallace this morning over here.
Tragedy. It's obviously a tragedy. Nothing justifies this. And presumably this man, who appears deranged, if nothing else, will be tried for murder, as he should be. But it's a tragedy, especially on a holiday weekend.
You have been one of the toughest critics, as we've said, of Planned Parenthood's alleged harvesting of body parts, selling them for fetal research. Some of the pro-choice advocates are saying language like yours, not specifically singling you out, but language like yours has incited violence. I'd like to get your reaction to that, but also, is it that you would say to protesters, people outside these clinics, about the limits of their opposition?
Well, first, it is not alleged. Planned Parenthood acknowledged several weeks ago that they would no longer take compensation for body parts, which sounds like an admission that they were doing so. Secondly, this is so typical of the left to immediately begin demonizing a messenger because they don't agree with the message. The vast majority of Americans agree. What Planned Parenthood is doing is wrong, and that's why the vast majority of Americans are prepared not only to defund Planned Parenthood, but also to stop abortion for any reason at all after 5 months. So what I would say to anyone who tries to link this terrible tragedy to anyone who opposes abortion or opposes the sale of body parts is this is typical left-wing tactics.
And what would you say to the protesters, the people that are outside the clinics and opposing?
Well, any protesters should always be peaceful, whether it's Black Lives Matter or pro-life protesters. Protesters should always be peaceful and respectful.
Let me turn subjects.
So yeah, like I said, Carly Fiorina uses this attack on Planned Parenthood as an opportunity to attack Planned Parenthood. She doesn't back down from any of her claims about the sale of baby body parts and how she claims, like I said, that Planned Parenthood now admits it. And I thought that was kind of disgusting. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I notice I have about 120 live viewers. I've been reading your comments along the way. And I appreciate those of you who join me live, and even those of you who are watching the recorded show who leave me your comments and let me know what you think. The next clip I want to show is kind of similar to the Carly Fiorina clip. This is another one of the lower level Republican candidates for president reacting to the Planned Parenthood shooting. And like Carly Fiorina, this is former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. He does give like a little bit against the shooter. So, like Carly Fiorina said, we should be against all violence, and Mike Huckabee basically says the same thing and says no one on the pro-life side is advocating violence, which isn't exactly true. But he also starts off by saying that he thinks this is domestic terrorism, which is something of an admission for someone on the right side of the political spectrum, I guess. And anyway, I'll discuss that a little more after you watch. This is, again, from CNN State of the Union, Brianna Keilar asking Mike Huckabee whether rhetoric, nasty rhetoric against Planned Parenthood is responsible for this attack. And here's Mike Huckabee's answer in this clip.
Shooter who held a Planned Parenthood hostage for 6 hours on Friday killed 3 people. 2 remain unidentified, but the third was police officer Garrett Swayze, who rushed to the clinic to offer his help. He was an elder at his church, and he leaves behind a wife and 2 children. Joining me to talk about the shooting is Republican presidential candidate and former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. Governor, thanks so much for joining us. We certainly appreciate it.
Well, delighted to be here, Brianna.
I do want to begin with this shootout that took place on Friday at this Planned Parenthood clinic in Colorado Springs. You heard that law enforcement is now telling CNN the shooter has anti-abortion, anti-government views, and he referenced baby parts following the attack. Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains put out this following statement. It said, "We share the concerns of many Americans that extremists are creating a poisonous environment that feeds domestic terrorism in this country." What do you make of this argument, Governor?
Well, we don't know fully what the facts are. They're still being determined. We don't even know some of the victims' names yet. But regardless of why he did it, what he did is domestic terrorism, and what he did is absolutely abominable, especially to those of us in the pro-life movement, because there's nothing about any of us that would condone or in any way look the other way at something like this. We're not going to have the kind of language that you heard from John Kerry, where he talked about legitimizing or rationalizing terrorist actions. There's no legitimizing, there's no rationalizing. It was mass murder. It was absolutely unfathomable. And there's no excuse for killing other people, whether it's happening inside the Planned Parenthood headquarters, inside their clinics where many millions of babies die, or whether it's people attacking Planned Parenthood. We ought to value life. Every life truly does have worth and value. And this is an incredible tragedy. And I don't know of anybody who will say anything other than just outright condemnation for this horrible, horrible, despicable act of murder.
Planned Parenthood seems to be, well, it is, blaming the rhetoric that popped up following the videos that came out that were taped, various videos of Planned Parenthood. And they say the rhetoric really has created this environment where this happened. Do you agree with that?
Brianna, I don't know of any pro-life leader, any. If you can tell me one, please correct me. But I don't know of anybody who has suggested violence toward Planned Parenthood personnel or some act of violence toward their clinics. I've not heard that, not from one single pro-life person. I've heard universal condemnation, whether it's from the Centers for Medical Progress that put out the videos, whether it's from pro-life advocates, and I consider myself one of them. I know of nobody who has ever suggested that Planned Parenthood be the target of some type of violent attack. So I think that's a little bit disingenuous on the part of Planned Parenthood to blame people who have a strong philosophical disagreement with the dismembering of human babies and with the selling of body parts, to say that we would like to retaliate by sending some madman into a clinic to kill people. God knows that's not what anybody would want. And this person, apparently, from everything we know, very unstable person, and just a terrible tragedy, especially for that police officer and his family.
This shooting has...
So Mike Huckabee says it's a terrible tragedy, especially for the police officer. He's against people who go in and shoot up Planned Parenthood clinics, but also against the millions of babies killed in Planned Parenthood clinics. And he also talks about Planned Parenthood's selling of fetal body parts, you know, so just like Carly Fiorina and even Adam Kinzinger, he uses the occasion of a actual violent attack on a Planned Parenthood clinic to attack Planned Parenthood using false claims that were put together in these biased, this total biased video editing from this anti-abortion group. And I don't know, I think it's kind of disgusting that they won't even take the weekend off from attacking Planned Parenthood after Planned Parenthood is attacked by this probably crazy gunman. I can't really fault them for blaming mental illness, although you'll see that a little more by the end of this topic. I'll show how one Republican congressman wants to totally go to the subject of mental illness. But before I get there, kind of on the subject of mental illness, I want to show a clip from Donald Trump. His reaction to the Planned Parenthood shooting. It's, he also condemns it, but he also, like the other Republican candidates I've shown, uses it as an opportunity to attack Planned Parenthood, talking about how there are many people who are unhappy about the selling of the fetal body parts, or the way that they talk about it in a mechanical way, or I can't remember exactly the way he put it, but you can watch it yourself over in this clip.
Now, a spokesperson for Planned Parenthood is concerned that the heated rhetoric around the Planned Parenthood debate could have had an adverse effect, basically, on this mentally disturbed individual. Do you think the rhetoric got out of hand on Planned Parenthood?
No, I think he's a sick person, and I think he was probably a person ready to go. We don't even know the purpose. I mean, he hasn't come out, to the best of my knowledge, with a statement as to why it happened to be at that location.
Well, we have reporting.
He lived in a different area.
We have reporting that he was talking about baby parts and things like that from law enforcement officials during his interview.
I will tell you, there is a tremendous group of people that think it's terrible, all of the videos that they've seen with some of these people from Planned Parenthood talking about it like you're selling parts to a car. I mean, there are a lot of people that are very unhappy about that. Now, I know some of the tapes were perhaps not pertinent. I know that a couple of people that were running for office or are running for office on the Republican side were commenting on tapes that weren't appropriate, but there were many tapes that are appropriate and in terms of commenting on, and there are people that are extremely upset about it. It looks like you're talking about parts to some machine or something, and they're not happy about it.
So that means you're not surprised that someone might take an extreme reaction to this?
Well, this was an extremist, and this was a man who obviously, and they said prior to this that he was mentally disturbed, so he's a mentally disturbed person. There's no question about that.
But it does sound like you understand why people might react this way?
Well, there's tremendous dislike. I can say that because I go to rallies, and I have by far, and you will admit that, I think, but I have by far the biggest crowds, nobody even close, and that includes Bernie Sanders, by the way, whose crowds are going down, down, down like a rock ever since he gave Hillary a free pass on the emails. But I see a lot of anxiety, and I see a lot of dislike for Planned Parenthood. There's no question about that.
Is there a way you could lose it?
Yeah, Donald Trump was the only one who fit in an attack on Bernie Sanders in the middle of his attack on Planned Parenthood. I don't know what that was all about, but that was kind of typical Republican response, and I'm going to show the next Republican candidate. It used to be the second, and now he may have dropped to third place with Ted Cruz overtaking him in Iowa, which I'll discuss later in the program. But this is Dr. Ben Carson responding to the Planned Parenthood attack. He almost did a full Ginsburg. I think he was on 4 of the 5 shows this morning, and he answered this. Basically gave the same answer on all 4 of the shows. I'm only going to show it once, where basically he comes out against all hateful rhetoric. And for my YouTube commenters, he also talks about the hate in comment sections on the internet, which he equates to the people who have said these hateful things about Planned Parenthood that may have fueled this gunman in Colorado Springs, as I'll discuss after you watch that clip. Also from NBC's Meet the Press this morning, like that last interview with Donald Trump. Donald Trump was only on Meet the Press. Ben Carson was on several shows, including Meet the Press, in this clip.
There was this shooting in Colorado Springs, and overnight there's now been reports that the shooter was yelling about baby parts. Planned Parenthood put out this statement: "We've seen an alarming increase in hateful rhetoric and smear campaigns against abortion providers and patients over the last few months. That environment breeds acts of violence. Americans reject the hatred and vitriol that fueled this tragedy." That was again from a Planned Parenthood Rocky Mountain spokesperson. Do you believe that the rhetoric got too heated on Planned Parenthood, and are you concerned that it may have motivated a mentally disturbed individual?
I think any hateful rhetoric directed at anyone from any source is too much. It's something that we need to get away from. We have to stop allowing ourselves to be pushed into different corners and then throwing hateful barbs at each other. You know, all you have to do is go to the internet and read any article, and you go to the comment section. You don't get 5 comments down before people are calling each other idiots and all kinds of names. You know, when did we become so immature? We must somehow manage to regain the high ground and understand that we're not each other's enemies, even though we may have some differences of opinions about things. Let's stop trying to destroy each other and let's work constructively. Let's put things on the table. Let's have a conversation about the rationale for our approaches.
That's a good way to end things. Dr. Carson, appreciate you coming on Meet the Press, and travel home safely, sir.
Thank you.
You got it.
Now, the reason I find that a little bit disingenuous, I mean, first of all, it's not a very controversial stance to come out against all hateful speech, I guess, but it's not like Dr. Ben Carson hasn't said some hateful things himself every now and then, you know, comparing Syrian refugees to rabid dogs, or some of them at least, and comparing Obamacare to slavery or Nazi Germany. He seems to bring up Nazi Germany all the time. That seems kind of hateful in some of the comparisons he uses and some of the ways he talks politically. So I don't know if he's really blameless when it comes to hateful rhetoric, but that's what Dr. Ben Carson said on all 4 of the shows he was on when asked about the Planned Parenthood shooting. He came out against all hateful speech on all sides, including on the anti-abortion side. And so, having shown all those Republicans who took the opportunity of the physical attack on a Planned Parenthood clinic to go forward with more attacks on Planned Parenthood that Republicans have been engaging in for months, I wanted to show one clip. Well, this is one of a couple clips of the head of the Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, or that's pretty close to her title. It's either president and executive director and a Planned Parenthood of the Rocky Mountains, or something very close to that. Her name is Vicki Cowert, and she backed up the statement she made around the time of the shooting about how the poisonous environment has fueled extremists that have engaged in these acts of domestic terrorism. And she was talking to Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos about that, and she didn't back down from that. And she also got a chance to say that these charges against Planned Parenthood were false charges, which is a point that really didn't come up with any of those Republican candidates in those clips I showed earlier. At least it came up in this clip on ABC this morning here.
Tragedy. I want to move back to this idea of domestic terrorism again. You're being cautious about what the suspect may or may not have said, but you have said in a statement that extremists are creating a poisonous environment that feeds domestic terrorism.
We've experienced so much hateful language, hateful speech. Such a negative environment has been created around the work that Planned Parenthood does, around the idea of safe and legal abortion. And we've seen that across the country from all sorts of speakers in the last few months. I can't believe that this isn't contributing to some folks, mentally unwell or not, thinking that it's okay to target Planned Parenthood or to target abortion providers.
Are you talking about members of Congress? Are you talking about politicians?
I think politicians have been in that conversation, and I mean, you know that the airwaves are full of anti-abortion language, of anti-Planned Parenthood accusations, much of which is false in nature. And we at Planned Parenthood are first and foremost a healthcare provider. We provide life-saving services to all kinds of folks, men and women across our communities. And the tirades against Planned Parenthood in the last few months have really been over the top.
Thanks very much for joining.
So a little bit of truth there after all that Republican dishonesty and spin and attacks on Planned Parenthood. I just wanted to make sure I showed that one clip from Vicki Cowert where she pointed out that a lot of these attacks have been over the top and basically false, and they don't have a basis in fact, and yet they still beat these drums of hate and negativity against Planned Parenthood for political reasons, and that is kind of disgusting, as I was saying during those earlier clips. I'm going to have another clip of Vicki Cowert in just a minute after I show a couple clips from the mayor of Colorado Springs, John Suthers, also talking to Martha Raddatz on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. First, being very circumspect about talking about the motive of the shooter, since the police haven't really released that information, but then being pretty clear that he thinks that Planned Parenthood was the target over in this clip.
Or can you tell us about the motivation in this killing?
Well, Martha, the police and the prosecutor have not officially released anything about the motivation. As a former district attorney, I'm very respectful of that, and I'll await, the release of official information before we'll comment on the motivation.
But do you believe Planned Parenthood was targeted?
It certainly appears that way. I'm sure that as the case proceeds, the criminal case proceeds, we'll learn a lot more about the motivation.
Do you know anything more about these?
So that's the mayor of Colorado Springs, first not wanting to talk about the motive, but then being willing to say that Planned Parenthood seems to be the target, which I notice some people on the right still don't seem to be willing to admit, despite all these facts coming out. I mean, the guy seems to be mentally unbalanced and has a history of doing kind of wacky things, although nothing this tragic or nasty, but he also seems to have some affinity for right-wing ideologies motivating his craziness, apparently. And that's also in this next clip from ABC's This Week. Martha Raddatz asked the mayor of Colorado Springs whether this was domestic terrorism, and he says that also seems likely, and then he talks about the shooter as someone being someone who's off the grid, an off-the-grid domestic terrorist who's one of the tougher ones to ferret out, which I will talk about after you see that clip over here.
Active domestic terrorism.
It certainly appears that way. We have, Martha, something that occurs quite a bit. We have a person that's pretty much off the grid and acting for whatever motivations. Very hard to ferret out these folks. You know, I was an attorney general that was head of a committee looking at things that are consistent about these kinds of incidents. And one of the things we don't do very well is identify these people, sometimes with mental health problems, and prevent their access to weapons. And we'll wait and see here, but all indications are this guy, as I say, was off the grid.
Okay, thank you very much, Mayor Suthers. Now let's...
And so, yeah, that's what the mayor of Colorado Springs, John Suthers, is saying. And there's another quick clip I want to show of Vicki Cowert, the head of the Planned Parenthood of Rocky Mountains, that includes this Colorado Springs clinic. And she basically mirrored what the mayor of Colorado Springs said in answer to whether Planned Parenthood was the target, that basically the only information she had was from the same news reports, as you can see in this clip.
Cowert, do you believe the facility was targeted because it is a Planned Parenthood facility?
Good morning. Like the mayor, I have the same kinds of information. It's been reported that the individual that did this crime had ramblings about abortion, but we didn't have any advance notice. But it does appear that it was targeted at us from what we've heard.
And walk us through.
So, yeah, that's the second clip I wanted to show of the woman from Planned Parenthood, Vicki Cowert. And like I said, she doesn't know any more than what's in the news reports, but the news reports are starting to show some sort of targeting of Planned Parenthood, some sort of right-wing ideology, anti-abortion, but also kind of a deranged, disordered individual. And that was the main dodge that the Republican chair of the House Homeland Security Committee used when he was asked about whether this was domestic terrorism. And he didn't really answer that question when he was talking to Brianna Keilar on CNN State of the Union, although I don't think I have the clip of him. Was it on Face the Nation? I think one of the other shows he did say that he wasn't sure it fit the definition of domestic terrorism, but he basically tries to switch the conversation over to the issue of mental illness rather than the Planned Parenthood and the right-wing ideology issue over in this clip.
I'll let you go about Friday's shooting in Colorado Springs. The shooter there at the Planned Parenthood clinic made reference to baby parts after he was arrested. Planned Parenthood calling this an act of domestic terror. Do you think that women are safe going to Planned Parenthood clinics?
Well, this was a horrible tragedy. It doesn't advance the pro-life movement. Ending lives doesn't advance that. I think this is a case of mental illness. We have found that under current law, if you're adjudicated mentally defective, you can't purchase a firearm. What we found is that too many of these cases have not gotten into the system, like the Navy Yard shooter. And I think we need to look at, there's legislation to put more of these cases into the system so that we can try to prevent something like this. But, you know, I mean, it's just a very sad event that, I can see why women would be concerned. And I know that with the clinics that the security is being heightened.
Yeah, we know that's happening in a number of cities. Congressman McCaul, thanks so much for being with us. Really appreciate your time.
So that is the last clip I'm going to show on this whole Planned Parenthood shooting in Colorado Springs. You can see that Republicans have started to react to it and found different ways to kind of dodge the main issue, that it was an attack on women's right to reproductive health care and attack on, you know, the right to privacy and the right to abortion in this country, which is supposed to be legal and women are supposed to have access to, and Republicans have been doing the best they can to restrict that access, and they've made all these attacks on Planned Parenthood, a lot of which are completely not based in fact, and I guess as the developing facts seem to show, this one crazy guy may have acted based on some of the rhetoric that he's been hearing from places like Fox News and the Republican Party, or I guess that remains to be seen, but that doesn't mean that you actually blame the rhetoric in terms of punishing people that would violate First Amendment free speech rights, but it does show that when you demonize a group, that there are going to be people who feel like going out and slaying the demon, I guess. People who believe in demons, who are crazy that way. Anyway, you can let me know what you think down in the comments section. I'm going to move on to the next topic, which I think I have about 10 clips on the topic of the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race. No clips on the Democratic side, no Bernie Sanders, no Hillary Clinton, not even much discussion of the Democratic side of the race this week. There'll be some passing references to Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders. I showed Donald Trump attacking Bernie Sanders in that last clip where he was reacting to Planned Parenthood, and I think one of the other Donald Trump clips I have includes an attack on Bernie Sanders. I'll have to watch it to be sure, but I want to start with an interesting attack on the Trump phenomenon from NBC's Meet the Press this morning. Chuck Todd first did this introductory bit about whether anything will be able to stop Donald Trump's attack on the truth. And then I'm going to show this almost over 5 minute clip, I think, of Chuck Todd's interview with Donald Trump, where he tries to get him to admit that, you know, the facts matter and the things he's saying aren't true, and doesn't really get a lot of traction. But first, here's the introduction where Chuck Todd says the big story of the week is, can anything stop Donald Trump and his lack of telling the truth, over in this clip.
But we begin with the question that has confounded the political class for months. Can anything stop Donald Trump? Even the truth. Hillary Clinton, Ben Carson, Chris Christie, all have been called out for what Stephen Colbert once dubbed as truthiness. But no one has had more controversial statements questioned than the man who'll join us in just a moment, Donald Trump.
Ben's the truth. You know what? He may, but he's still going to get things done.
This week, Donald Trump appeared to do more than merely bend the truth.
I watched when the World Trade Center came tumbling down. And I watched in Jersey City, New Jersey, where thousands and thousands of people were cheering.
That 9/11 claim was widely debunked by city officials, factcheck.org, and NBC News. PolitiFact gave Trump a pants on fire rating. Still, Trump doubled down.
They were dancing in the street, and they were dancing on rooftops. I'm not making that up.
And fact checkers have not been able to stop Trump from saying this again and again.
Now I hear we want to take in 200,000 Syrians, right? And they could be, listen, they could be ISIS. You know what, 200,000? That's like an army.
Actually, the Obama administration plans to accept 10,000 Syrian refugees over the next year. Do voters care?
When the media asks questions about him bending the truth, what's going on in Washington right now? There's never been more truth bending in our lives.
Just 19% of Americans say they feel they can trust their government most or all of the time. And Trump supporters like his overall message, even if he strays from the facts. Trump is not the only candidate stretching the truth. Ben Carson said this on Syria.
We also must recognize that it's a very complex place. You know, the Chinese are there.
Later, Carson's campaign tried to clarify, saying he meant Chinese weapons and equipment were in Syria, not the Chinese military. Then there's Hillary Clinton and her evolving explanations about her email server.
It was fully above board. The people in the government knew that I was using a personal account.
But many of those people, including the president, have said they did not know she used it exclusively for government business. Just 27% of all voters and 52% of Democratic primary voters give Clinton a good rating on being honest and straightforward. Despite their problems with the truth, Trump and Clinton remain their party's frontrunners.
If Diogenes were looking for that honest man, once they got past Bernie Sanders in the presidential election, they'd be looking for a long time. The voters can't find that honest person in 2016.
I'm joined on the phone by the Republican president.
So yeah, that was the NBC Meet the Press piece, and at the end they had on the pollster Peter Hart actually saying that Bernie Sanders was the only honest candidate in the race, and that's actually going to provide the impetus for Donald Trump's attack on Bernie Sanders in this next clip I'm going to show, which immediately followed the introductory part there. And you'll see Chuck Todd really tries to get Donald Trump to admit that he's not telling the truth about these Muslims celebrating 9/11 in New Jersey and some of the other things he said. And Donald Trump just won't admit it. And by the end of this, it's about 5.5 minutes, this clip. Near the end, you'll see Chuck Todd getting almost exasperated and Donald Trump telling him, "Oh, calm down, Chuck." It's kind of funny, or I don't know, not funny and kind of a sad way, I guess, kind of like that first clip I showed for the program. And you can watch it yourself over here.
Good morning.
Let me ask you about these claims this way. You demand, and you've demanded of me, pinpoint accuracy when we report on things about you, including, for instance, your net worth. Why shouldn't we demand the same pinpoint accuracy in the claims that you make? Is it any hypocritical of you calling us out if we're not calling you out when you stray from the truth?
Well, now people have got my net worth right, and they're saying what my real net worth is for a long time. You know, as a private company, they weren't doing that, but now they're doing it largely, I guess, due to the big filing that I made with the federal government, with the FEC. As far as all of these claims, I believe that it's the Obama's intention. They said 10,000 people, Syrians. We don't want them because we don't know who they are, and I love the idea of building a safe zone someplace in Syria, but they said 10,000, and yet the Democratic debate, they said 65,000 to the best of my recollection. Hillary said it, and so did Bernie Sanders. You're saying Bernie Sanders is so honest. I doubt that very much. But Bernie Sanders said it, and Hillary said it. I think they were talking in the Democrat debate. I think they were talking about 65,000. I have it upon a certain amount of knowledge. I'm very friendly with a lot of people on both sides, that Obama's plan is 200 to 250,000. So he said 10. The debate said 65 already before we even start. And I think what he really has in mind find is 200,000 people and maybe even more than that coming into our country. And we can't have it. We don't know who these people are. They're undocumented totally. And by the way, even if it's 10,000, we can't have it. We can't have people coming in that we know nothing about. There's no paperwork, and for good reason, but there's no paperwork. And this is going to be, or has the potential to be, one big, fat Trojan horse. And we cannot have that, Jeff.
All right. Well, let's go back to let's back up here a minute. Let's go to this Jersey City comment. You said you saw this. Nobody can find evidence of this. And more importantly, the article that you tweeted out that says that this backed you up, that in itself, there were 3 or 4 different reports that month in New Jersey that said it was a myth that was spread, that it was a false rumor, FBI, you name it. Where did you see this?
Chuck, I saw it on television. So did many other people. And many
Jersey
people.
City.
I've had hundreds.
You saw Jersey
in the area.
City.
I also heard Patterson. Excuse me.
Okay.
I've heard Jersey City. I've heard Patterson. It was 14 years ago. But I saw it on television. I saw clips. And so did many other people. And many people saw it in person. I've had hundreds of phone calls to the Trump organization saying we saw it. It was dancing in the streets. And by the way, the Washington Post, now he tried to pull back, but the Washington Post reported tailgate parties and reports of tailgate parties. Tailgate parties means like for a football game where you have hundreds and hundreds and maybe even thousands of people having tailgate parties. I saw it at the time. I stick by it. Hundreds of people have confirmed it.
This didn't happen in New Jersey. There were plenty of reports, and you're feeding a stereotype.
Chuck, it did happen in New Jersey. I have hundreds of people that agree with me. And by the way,
but they want to agree with you. That doesn't make it true.
Chuck, you have a huge Muslim population over there, and that's fine. That's fine. But you have a huge Muslim population between Patterson and different places and Jersey City, an unbelievable large population. If they're going to be doing it at soccer games, if they're going to be doing it all around the world, it was being done. It was when the Trade Center came down, it was done all around the world, and you know that because that has been reported very strongly. Why wouldn't it have taken place? I've had hundreds of people call in and tweet in on Twitter saying that they saw it and I was 100% right. Now, the Washington Post also wrote about tailgate parties. We're looking for other articles and we're looking for other clips. And I wouldn't be surprised if we found them, Chuck. But for some reason, they're not that easy to come by. I saw it. So many people saw it, Chuck. And so why would I take it back? I'm not going to take it back.
Well, just because somebody repeats something doesn't make it true, and I guess that's actually that's the worst.
I don't mean I had 2 calls, Chuck. Even yesterday, I was in Sarasota, Florida, and people were saying they lived in Jersey. They moved down to Florida because taxes are a lot lower in Florida.
If I said people,
Mr.
Trump, if I said, well, people have said Mr. Trump's not worth $10 billion, and people were saying, you would say that was crazy. You wouldn't make a business deal based on retweets and based on hearsay. You're running for president of the United States. Your words matter. Truthfulness matters. Fact-based stuff matters.
Chuck, make it easy, Chuck. Just play cool. This is people in this country that love our country that saw this. By the hundreds they're calling and they're tweeting, and there's a lot of people in Sarasota. People would tell me yesterday they used to live in New Jersey. They remember it vividly. They thought it was disgusting. So these are people that saw it too. The Washington Post reported it. Other people, many people have seen it. So I believe that I have a very good memory, Chuck. I'll tell you, I have a very good memory. I saw it somewhere on television many years ago, and I never forgot it. And it was on television, too.
Let me ask you about...
So there you have it. Donald Trump is not backing down. He's not apologizing or correcting any errors. He's not admitting any errors. He basically is telling Chuck Todd he has to calm down about this idea that political discussion should be based on actual facts rather than whatever comes out of Donald Trump's mouth at any given moment. But I think that's the last Donald Trump clip for tonight. I'm going to show a couple reactions to Donald Trump. First from Carly Fiorina, who even when she's attacking Donald Trump, I still don't find very appealing. but she does respond to a comment or a question from Chris Wallace on Fox News Sunday about Donald Trump's attack on this journalist with a disability, and Chris Wallace equates it to the time Donald Trump attacked her face, and she uses it as an opportunity to attack Donald Trump and say how small he is, which I guess isn't something that a woman should say about a man, over in this clip.
Specifically, first, you mentioned Donald Trump. One of your biggest moments so far in this campaign was when you shot back at Mr. Trump after he commented on your appearance. This week, he's under fire again, this time for mocking the physical disability of a reporter. Take a look.
You got to see this guy. Oh, I don't know what I said. I don't remember. He's going like, I don't remember. Oh, maybe that's what I said. This is 14 years ago. They didn't do a retraction.
Are you prepared to call Trump out on that?
Well, yes, this is the pattern, isn't it? The pattern is he says something insulting, offensive, outrageous. The media pays attention. Then he claims we all misunderstood him. The media pays attention again. This is the pattern, perhaps, of an entertainer. It's certainly not the pattern of a leader. Apparently, Donald Trump only feels big when he's trying to make everyone else look small. Of course, in the end, he looks the smallest of all.
Ooh, that was kind of a burn from Carly Fiorina, but, you know, for some reason, I never really enjoy listening to Carly Fiorina speak, even when she's saying something that I kind of agree with, as she was for once in that particular case. But she wasn't the only one who was attacking Donald Trump amongst his rivals on the Republican side. The next clip I'm going to show is from Ohio Governor John Kasich, who still, I suppose, has an outside chance to have an upset in New Hampshire if he can, probably not in Iowa, but he's just not doing that well in the polls. But he has been running this ad that compares Donald Trump to, I don't know, a Nazi, Adolf Hitler, or, you know, because of all the ways he's going after different minority groups. And it shows this POW quoting that poem, is it Martin Niebuhr or something like that? They came for the Unionists, they came for the Jews, they came for the whatever, and when they finally came for me, there was no one left to speak for me because I hadn't spoken for all the other people. Anyway, that's kind of the basis of the John Kasich ad that you'll see he's talking about over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, guest hosted by Martha Raddatz this week. And Martha Raddatz starts off playing a little clip from the ad and then questions John Kasich whether it's appropriate to compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler over in this clip.
And Donald Trump, your campaign has a new ad out that is stirring a lot of controversy. Let's listen.
If he keeps going and he actually becomes president, he might just get around to you. And you better hope that there's someone left to help you.
Okay, you're referencing the famous anti-Nazi poem, First They Came For. The ad appears to compare Donald Trump to Adolf Hitler. Is that the comparison you're trying to make?
Martha, this is Colonel Tom Moe. He was a POW for 5 years in North Vietnam, was beaten and tortured and came within an inch of losing his own life. And these are his words. He feels very strongly about a man who divides us. And as you know, Martha,
it's your ad.
Well, but it's his words, and it's about whether we want to have a leader who unifies the country. I mean, Trump has criticized and insulted women, Hispanics, Muslims, and reporters. In addition to that, he was picking on some.
Do you believe what Donald Trump is saying, that he didn't know he was insulting the reporter?
Well, he's insulted other reporters. This one, he absolutely mocked, who was disabled. Now, Martha, I know you're offended by this. We all are. We need a leader that brings us together, not a leader that's separating us one group from another.
Does that mean you would not support him if he were the nominee?
Well, he's not going to be the nominee, Martha, because at the end, look, he may have 20% of the vote, but he's got 80% of Republicans who don't support him. And somebody has to call him out on this kind of divisive language. It's
answer
outrageous.
That question. You say he won't get the nomination.
No.
What if he does? Will you support him?
He's not going to.
So, you know, we're not even going to go there. But I tell you this.
So you would you
well,
support him, Governor Kasich, if he is the Republican nominee, after what you've just said about him?
I think he's very divisive, and I do not believe he will last, Martha. I know all the press keeps speculating on what he's going to do. You all said he was going to fall, then he didn't. Now you're, all, you're all, up in the air about, well, maybe he's going to make it. He's not going to make it, Martha. You know why he's not going to make it? Because somebody who divides this country here in the 21st century, who's calling names of women and Muslims and Hispanics and mocking reporters, then saying, I didn't do it, but he did do it. It's just not going to happen, Martha. And everybody needs to get over it and take a deep breath. At the end of the day, we have serious problems domestically and with foreign affairs.
I'm going to have to wrap it up here. We talked about foreign affairs quite a bit. We really appreciate you joining us this morning.
And I wish you were in the race, Martha. I might be for you if you were the nominee.
Oh, that would be a disaster. Okay, next on this Thanksgiving.
I don't know. As far as Republicans go, I think Ohio Governor John Kasich is one of the more compassionate, one of the better Republicans, if I can even say that any Republican is better than another from my particular political point of view, which I can't. But I guess I wish the Republican Party was more like John Kasich or maybe Rand Paul in some cases, and those are the only two. Well, I guess I pointed to something Carly Fiorina said about Donald Trump that I kind of agreed with, but in terms of policies, I can't think of much that she's ever said I agreed with. But John Kasich is trying to move the Republican Party. He's almost like the John Huntsman of the 2016 race. John Huntsman was the person most on the left in terms of being liberal. Rand Paul is also kind of on the left on some issues, but he's kind of this weird conservative libertarian where he's also like way to the right on some other issues, like the Civil Rights Act and whether it's constitutional and whether the Supreme Court should go back to the Lochner era, and I don't even want to go into all that. But the next clip I want to show is another Republican who doesn't seem to have much chance beating Donald Trump. This is former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, who is also asked about what one of his advisors said about Donald Trump being a fascist, almost kind of like the Adolf Hitler thing from Governor John Kasich's ad. And Jeb Bush says that Donald Trump isn't serious. He seems to finally have some good talking points about Donald Trump. In another part of this interview I didn't take a clip from, he seems to also be able to answer the question about what to do in Iraq and what the responsibility of his brother is for the development of ISIS. That I'm not going to show, but here he is saying that Donald Trump is not serious and is bad for the Republican Party and all sorts of good things that I wish got more traction but aren't getting any traction. This is talking to John Dickerson on CBS's Face the Nation this morning in this clip.
One of your security advisors, John Noonan, referred to Donald Trump and his plan for registering Muslims. He called him a fascist. Do you agree with that?
Look, I just think he's uninformed. He knows what he's saying. He's smart. He's playing you guys like a fiddle, the press, by saying outrageous things and garnering attention. That's his strategy, is to dominate the news. The simple fact is that he's been wrong on Syria and on the refugees pretty consistently, and no one's holding him to account. He first said we had no interest in being involved in Syria. Then he said, let the Russians take out ISIS. Then he said, let ISIS take out Assad. Back and forth it goes, and the net effect of this is, in these really serious times, he's not a serious leader.
So why, if he became the nominee, would you still support him as you've pledged to?
Look, I've said, because anybody is better than Hillary Clinton. Let me just be clear about that. But I have grave doubts about Donald Trump's ability to be commander-in-chief. I really do. I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt to see how the campaign unfolded. But if you listen to him talk, it's kind of scary, to be honest with you, because he's not a serious candidate. He doesn't talk about the issues at hand that are of national security importance for our country. To keep us safe is the first priority of the president. And he's all over the map, misinformed at best, and preying on people's fear at worst.
How would any of that specifically be better than Hillary Clinton?
Well, I'll let the voters decide about Donald Trump. I'm pretty confident that the more they hear of him, the less likely it is he's going to get the Republican nomination.
That last answer was a total dodge of his point earlier in his answer that he would still support Donald Trump over Hillary Clinton after describing Donald Trump as a fascist, or not disavowing a comment from one of his advisors that Donald Trump is a fascist, but somehow a fascist is better than Hillary Clinton. Well, I know some of my viewers may think that Hillary Clinton is also a fascist. I have some problems with Hillary Clinton, but I've said many times that if she ends up being the Democratic nominee, I'll almost definitely vote for her over any of those Republicans, certainly. And anyway, that's the last clip I want to show on Republican candidates reacting to Donald Trump. That was Jeb Bush, and you saw John Kasich and Carly Fiorina all criticizing Donald Trump after I showed a couple clips, or one clip of Donald Trump, and then where Chuck Todd couldn't get him to admit that facts actually exist, pretty much, which I thought was kind of funny. The next, I think, 5 clips, or the last 5 clips in the topic of the Republican presidential candidates, all have to do with another one of the front runners. This is Dr. Ben Carson, who's dropped somewhat in Iowa, which I think they're going to reference the poll that shows that he's actually been overtaken by Ted Cruz in Iowa. But this next clip is actually from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. Martha Raddatz talks about how Ben Carson has gone over to Jordan after having some problems with his foreign policy credentials. And then there's a report from ABC reporter Tom Llamas, who I guess went with Ben Carson to Jordan. And this is an overview which leads up to some clips from Ben Carson himself being interviewed from Jordan. But this is just the report on ABC this morning in this clip.
And Donald Trump, your campaign has a new ad out that is stirring a lot of controversy.
I guess it wouldn't be a show if I didn't play the wrong clip at least one time. This is the correct clip that I was just introducing over here.
Overseas to Jordan, meeting face-to-face with Syrian refugees after coming under fire for his lack of foreign policy experience. Ben Carson joins us shortly. First, the latest from ABC's Tom Llamas.
We're just getting a good impression of what's going on here.
Ben Carson's campaign releasing these images from his surprise trip to Jordan.
This clinic seems to be very nice.
Carson, visiting refugee camps where Syrians have fled civil war, says the U.S. must do more, but bringing 25,000 refugees to the United States does nothing to solve this crisis. Jordan already houses 1.4 million refugees. Jordan needs and deserves our help. The overseas trip coming as Carson has taken new heat for his foreign policy comments, like wrongly asserting that China was involved in the Syrian civil war.
You know, the Chinese are there as well as the Russians.
And comparing the screening of refugees to protecting children from rabid dogs.
You know, if there's a rabid dog running around in your neighborhood, you're probably not going to assume something good about that dog.
And national security issues critical to 2016 candidates. Our latest poll of Republicans shows terrorism now topping the economy as the most important issue for voters. For Carson, only 6% of Republicans in the crucial state of Iowa believe he's best to handle foreign policy. Ted Cruz takes the lead at 24%. He's come out against sending U.S. ground troops to Syria.
You asked about boots on the ground. The Kurds are our boots on the ground.
Donald Trump, meanwhile, wants more air power in the fight against ISIS.
I would bomb the out of them.
Trump says he's open to the idea of sending ground troops, while others have been more definitive in their support, which ranges from limited intervention to large-scale deployment. For This Week, Tom Llamas, ABC News, New York.
And
I like the way that ABC report at the end gave kind of an overview of the Republican candidates' foreign policy views, how some of them are in favor of boots on the ground and others are just in favor of bombing. There actually are several Republican candidates, Donald Trump included, and also Ted Cruz, who I'm surprised aren't in favor of a more robust on-the-ground force that are basically saying we just want to do bombing. And that's an interesting split in the Republican Party. I thought from the end of that report from Tom Llamas on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, guest hosted by Martha Raddatz. But it started off with the introduction about Ben Carson having problems with his foreign policy credentials, and that's why he's gone to Jordan. And the next clip I want to show is from NBC's Meet the Press, where Chuck Todd, in his interview with Ben Carson, actually talks to him about his drop in the polls. I think this may be the one where he shows the Quinnipiac poll where Ted Cruz has surpassed Ben Carson in Iowa. And then Chuck Todd asked Ben Carson if he's learned anything from this trip to Jordan, and he gives an answer pretty similar to the answer he gave on several different shows this morning over in this clip.
It has been hurt more by the focus on foreign policy after Paris than Ben Carson. He's already slipped from first place in 2 Iowa polls. But to bolster his foreign policy credentials, he's visiting Syrian refugee camps in Jordan. And this weekend, his campaign released this online video.
President Obama attacks me for not wanting Syrian refugees to enter our country. We need leaders who'll stop whining and start winning.
And I'm pleased to say Dr. Carson joins me now from the Jordanian capital of Amman. Dr. Carson, let me just start with the basic question. What did you learn on this trip?
Well, you know, it was always wonderful to see things firsthand and to have an opportunity to actually go to the refugee camps and to some of the medical facilities and actually talk to the people, not only to the Jordanians, who are incredibly generous in terms of their support of refugees, and that's been the case for decades now, but also to the Syrian refugees themselves, to find out what they think about the whole situation. What are their wants and desires? The Syrians want to be in Syria. They want to be repatriated in their own country, and they are looking for a mechanism to get there. But in the meantime, the facilities that have been offered to them here in Jordan are very satisfactory. And when I asked them what Americans could do, they said if Americans could support those facilities to a greater degree, because they have much more capacity here in Jordan, and I suspect in some of the other countries as well.
Let me just play something here.
So, yeah, Dr. Ben Carson gave a very similar answer to that on all 4 shows he was on this morning, and in a couple of the shows, I think on Face the Nation and also on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos, he mentioned that the amount of money the United States needs to give to support these refugee camps in Jordan is the same amount or less than the amount that we spend on Halloween candy every year. And I thought that Martha Raddatz over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos did the best job criticizing or critiquing that particular talking point that he came up with, pointing out the amount of money we already spend on refugee camps in Jordan, or humanitarian aid to Jordan, is $3 billion, very close to the $4 billion on the Halloween candy. And then when Ben Carson talks about the refugees wanting to be resettled back to Syria or wanting more amenities at their refugee camps, and you have to go there to talk to them, he doesn't realize apparently that Martha Raddatz is a very well-traveled reporter. I've shown clips just in the last several weeks of her going to these refugee camps in Jordan, so she has like a really good follow-up question about how what they really want is jobs, and that's why they want to be resettled out of refugee camps if they can't make it back to Jordan. And anyway, I'll talk about all that a little more after you watch the best follow-up questions, I thought, from any of the anchors this morning talking to Ben Carson. This is Martha Raddatz pretty much tearing apart Dr. Ben Carson's talking points on going to the refugee camps in Jordan in this clip.
And again, I was a little bit surprised with the answer, because it wasn't what we're hearing a lot. We're hearing that they all want to come here to the United States, and that's not what they want. They want to go back home. But they said the United States and other nations could be much more supportive of the Herculean efforts manifested by the Jordanians and taking in people at a lot of expense to themselves. And they cannot continue that without help from the international community. You know, you look at last month, we spent $3 billion on Halloween candy. That's the amount of money that would need it to bridge the shortfall for a year that they're having in Jordan with the refugees.
Well, Dr. Carson, we've spent more than $4 billion in humanitarian aid, about $668 million to Jordan for the refugees. So what more could they possibly be doing?
Well, you know, you have to go there and see for yourself, but you can see there are a lot of individual modules that they've created for these families. They're in the process of trying to get electricity, all of them, getting plumbing to all of them, you know, and they've taken in millions of people. You know, for us to bring 10,000 or 25,000 people over here, that doesn't solve the problem. I mean, we need to look at real solutions for the problem and not things that make us feel good about ourselves.
Dr. Carson, I actually have been to the refugee camps, and particularly in Zatari, and found the same thing. They want to go either back to Syria, which doesn't look possible at this point, or they want to go somewhere else. They want jobs. Do you welcome them into America now? Has anything changed your mind?
Well, when you say, you know, they want to escape the refugee camps, the main reason that any of them want to escape the refugee camps is because there's not adequate support there for them. If there were adequate support, it would be a completely different story.
But they don't want to stay there, Dr. Carson, do they? So, the people I talk to don't want to stay there.
They don't want to stay there permanently. They want to. They want to go. They want to be repatriated into their own country. That's what they want. And is that going to be easier from a neighboring country, or is that going to be easier from the United States of America?
Dr. Carson, by taking this trip in the middle of a campaign, are you acknowledging that you weren't quite...
Sorry, I cut it off in the middle of that question there, but I thought that Martha Raddatz did a great job pulling apart the talking points there that Dr. Ben Carson has on how the United States needs to spend our Halloween money on supporting refugee camps in Jordan, and that's why we don't need to take any refugees, and Europe won't have to take refugees. But the point that Martha Raddatz raised, Ben Carson didn't ever really answer about how are refugees going to have productive lives living in refugee camps where there's no economy. What they need to be is, if they can't go back to Syria, they need to be resettled somewhere where they can get jobs, and he didn't really have an answer for that. And I think Martha Raddatz also showed how, even though Dr. Ben Carson is supposedly getting schooled on foreign policy and he's made this trip over to Jordan, that if you take him out of his comfort zone in his talking points, he doesn't really engage in the question. This is Martha Raddatz talking about whether we should loosen the rules of engagement. You know, I kind of criticized a clip from her last week where she talked about that, and it's kind of a euphemism, the rules of engagement, because what they're really talking about is how willing should we be to kill civilians as collateral damage. And actually, in her question to Dr. Ben Carson this week, she asks him about the rules of engagement, and she explains in pretty good detail that she's talking about whether civilians should be killed and whether they should only go after one-use ISIS structures. That means the only buildings they blow up are buildings that are only being used by ISIS as a rule of engagement. And you'll see Dr. Ben Carson doesn't even really engage with the question. He goes back to his talking points about, you know, we need to listen to the experts, but this is kind of a policy idea that a candidate should be able to articulate, and he obviously still can't over in this clip.
I want to ask you quickly about ISIS. I was in Iraq last week, and I was in the Air Combat Control Center. Would you like to see the rules of engagement loosened? One of the things they told me is they aim for 0 civilian casualties and sole purpose ISIS structures. Should that change?
What I would really like to see is an administration that really seriously sits down with our experts in that region and would ask them, what is needed in order to accomplish our goal of eliminating this group of terrorists. That's what I would really like to see.
So you don't know whether you'd want those rules of engagement listed.
Experts in that area. Those of us who are not experts in that area can sit around all day long talking about, oh, we should do this and we should do that. But why don't we listen to the people who actually are the experts in that area, find out what it is that they need, and then our decision should be, do we really want to do that? Do we really want to give them what they need, or do we want to continue playing around like we are?
Okay, thanks very much, Dr. Carson.
So again, I think Martha Raddatz did a pretty good job of showing that Ben Carson couldn't be shaken from his talking points, couldn't engage with the question that was outside of his comfort zone on the issues that, when it came to the rules of engagement, whether we should be willing to kill civilians with our airstrikes and strike buildings that aren't only used by ISIS. He didn't really seem to have an answer other than listen to the experts, but the experts aren't really going to be able to answer that question. I mean, it's more of a policy question as to whether that type of action creates more enemies than it destroys. I mean, I happen to think that when you kill civilians as collateral damage, the family members of the people you kill are much more likely to be your enemies in the future, and that's kind of a policy idea, not something you get by talking to generals. Generals just give you the options based on various rules of engagement, but you have to know what the question, I don't know if Ben Carson really even understood that question based on his answer, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And I have one more clip of Dr. Ben Carson. This is over on CNN State of the Union, where I think Brianna Keilar also showed in a follow-up how Ben Carson couldn't really speak outside of the comfort zone of his talking points. This starts off with him answering a similar question that I showed previously about what he learned from his trip to Jordan, but then when it comes to the actual threat from ISIS, he can't leave his talking points, I don't think, as I'll discuss after you watch that final clip on the Republican side of the 2016 presidential race over here.
Dr. Carson, that you've actually slipped 10 percentage points over the last month. That's what various polls are showing, various Q polls. You told the New York Times that you think you've slipped because voters don't see you as the right person to be president in a time of terrorism. Do you think that this short trip is really enough to change the minds of Iowans, of Americans, and to show that you have a grasp of the challenges that ISIS poses to American security?
The trip is about fact-finding, about getting an opportunity to see firsthand without having things reinterpreted over something that is really incredibly important. And, it's not about me. It's about, these individuals and what's happening to them. And it's also about the United States of America and the people of our country and the kind of leadership that they deserve.
Do you feel that the trip has given you, I guess if you could talk about the new facts that you found, but also if you feel that the trip has given you a better grasp of the challenges that ISIS poses?
Yes. Yes, I think it really has. It's very similar to the trip that I took this summer down to the border of Mexico. And of course, we'd all heard about the difficulties there, but to be able to actually talk to the ranchers who were being terrorized, to be able to talk to the sheriffs and the sheriff deputies who put their lives on the line just to have ICE come and tell them you have to release these people.
But in the case of this trip, Dr. Carson, I do want to ask you with our limited time. That's just a small
part of what's being brought through.
In the case of this trip,
those are the kinds of things that really give you perspective.
What informed you in this trip about the challenges that ISIS poses to American security?
Well, the thing that I really learned here in listening to the refugees themselves is their intense desire to return to their own country and be repatriated. There's so many people who think that the ideal for everybody is to come to America and to be settled here, but that is not the ideal for everybody. And we need to be looking at mechanisms that already exist. Why do you want to recreate the will? when you already have something that's working. Let's maximize that, and then let's think about whether we need to recreate other wills.
Dr. Ben Carson, thanks so much for joining us from Jordan. We appreciate it.
So you can see when CNN's Brianna Keilar tried to get Dr. Ben Carson to say something about his trip to Jordan that involved him learning something new about the threat of ISIS, all he could talk about was what you had heard before in those previous clips about how we have to support the refugees in Jordan, because apparently that's what he'd been trained to say, and he didn't have anything to say about the threat from ISIS. At least that's how I interpret that last clip. You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. I've been reading the comments during the live show. I think I have about 170 or so live viewers. You can let me know what you think of all those Republican clips, because that was the last clip on the topic of the Republican candidates running for president. I'm sorry, I don't have any clips on the Democratic side. It wasn't covered at all on the Sunday morning news analysis shows from the big five corporate outlets from ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN, and Fox News. But I do have one quick clip I want to show on the topic of NSA spying, because today is a big day in NSA spying in terms of bulk phone record collection. The bulk phone record collection program expires. I believe today is the day. Is it the end of November, November 30th? Or I'm not sure the exact day, but it's either today or tomorrow, or I think it may be midnight tonight, according to the coverage I saw in a couple different parts of the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I'm going to show one quick clip. This is from Fox News Sunday, so it's going to be all about the danger of no longer having the government collect like 5 years worth of metadata, which means what number called what number and how long they talked to each other for every single phone call made in the United States for the last 5 years. Instead of that, now it's going to be held by the phone companies, and the United States government is going to have to get an actual court order, apparently, although I'm not even sure that's going to be all that robust in terms of protecting civil liberties, but at least it's an improvement, but not according to this conversation between Fox News anchor, or Fox News Sunday anchor, Chris Wallace, and the chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Republican Richard Burr. They talk about the danger, but and they relate it to the Paris attacks, but they never mention the fact that the bulk phone record collection program has never actually stopped any terrorist attack, which I will discuss a little more after you watch that clip here.
Developments on intelligence issues really in the last week, and I want to talk to you about those, sir. Today, at midnight, the NSA's bulk data collection of Americans' phone records, that program expired as of midnight this morning, and now the NSA is going to need a court order from a judge to collect records on any American. And again, we're not talking about the content of the phone call. We're simply talking about my phone number called your phone number, and we spoke, or people on those two lines spoke for X number of minutes. What impact do you think that's going to have on our counterterrorism effort?
Chris, I don't think it's too troubling that you would need a court order. I think what's troubling is that you're going to have to go to multiple telecom companies and at their pace search their records, which means it could take weeks. What we saw in Paris once we got a cell phone was that we used that cell phone number to look at cell phones it had talked to, and not only Paris investigators but Belgium investigators were able to expand the search net in a way that stopped a massive terror attack, an additional one in Paris, potentially has led to the apprehension of at least a dozen, if not more, ISIS operatives throughout Belgium, Germany, and parts of Europe. I'm not sure that we know the full extent of what we've learned to this point, but anytime you can take electronics and use those selectors, it's beneficial to the world's intelligence community. And the United States made a real mistake when they eliminated this program, where we could search foreign known terrorist telephone numbers to see if they had talked to anybody in the United States. I think that makes sense to the American people. But Congress took that away from the NSA, and unfortunately, it's not going to be a timely tool to use in the future.
Well, let me pick up on that, because you have signed onto legislation that's now in the Senate that would revive the program, which, as I say, ran out as of midnight. But the Senate just voted to end the program in June. So what are the chances that they're going to reverse that just a few months later?
Well, Chris, it's amazing what happens when people are reminded what terrorists can do. It hadn't happened here at home, but I think the American response to the Paris attack was as significant outside of New York and New Jersey as 9/11 was. The American people realized that the indiscriminate, brutal acts that ISIS carried out could happen at any community across this country and throughout the world. And I think as Americans, we believe we should do everything we can to eliminate that. Knowing who the terrorists are and where operatives may be in the United States is something Americans expect us to know. They expect us to investigate. And I want to make sure that the tools that law enforcement have are as robust as they possibly can be, and metadata is a big contributor to that.
I want to get into one last issue with you.
So there you see the one clip I'm going to show on the end of government bulk phone record collection. Of course, it doesn't mean the government can't look at those phone records. It just means they need to get a court order and they need to go to the phone companies. And I guess that whole conversation was meant to scare you that the government can no longer collect all that data itself for the last 5 years and keep all the records of our phone conversations, but not the actual content, although there are several programs that allow them to collect content that they're not even talking about there. But I wanted to show that clip because I think the bulk phone record surveillance program is a big problem, and I'm glad that the Edward Snowden revelations were able to shift the politics enough so that to some extent it's ended, at least the government collection part. If you're really interested in the story behind that, I suggest you read the No Place to Hide by Glenn Greenwald. That's a great book that I have up on my bookshelf here about the Edward Snowden revelations and how they all happened, at Glenn Greenwald's account anyway. That's one of the books on my bookshelf I've read, and I recommend highly. If you haven't read it, I guess it's like a year old at this point, but I suppose it might even be a good Christmas gift for people who are paranoid about the government listening in on their conversations. I have 2 more clips I want to show before I end the broadcast tonight. This is on a topic that gets very little coverage in the corporate media, climate change, but this week there's a big conference in Paris with, I think, 150 different government leaders, including Barack Obama, President of the United States, going over there. And the thing is, there wasn't that much coverage of this upcoming event, and the 2 reports I'm going to show both really focus on the terrorist attack in Paris and how it's overshadowed the conference, and how the conference is really going to be about all the government leaders, the NATO leaders, and especially Turkey, which is a member of NATO, and they're working with Russia on fighting ISIS because Turkey shot down this Russian airliner, and that's in this both of the clips. The first one is from Fox News Sunday, and then just to show that it wasn't just Fox News that was focusing on the terrorism aspect rather than really reporting on the issue of climate change almost at all. I'm also going to show how they reported on it on ABC's This Week in a very similar way to Fox News. But first, here's the Fox News Sunday clip, introduced by Chris Wallace, and then to their reporter Kevin Corke, about Obama going to Paris to discuss climate change, but it's really all about terrorism over here.
2 weeks after a devastating terror attack in Paris, 150 world leaders, including President Obama, are now gathering in the French capital. Their goal to craft a landmark deal to fight global warming. This comes amid a worldwide travel alert for U.S. citizens, although the president says there's no specific threat at home this holiday weekend. Fox News correspondent Kevin Corke is in Paris ahead of tomorrow's summit. Kevin.
Chris, good day to you. As you probably remember, back during the president's recent tour of Asia, it was an economic tour, but clearly global security and terrorism threatened to overshadow that, and again threatens to overshadow this climate gathering here in Paris. And given the events of the 13th of November, to say nothing of the fact that we're going to be joined by dozens of world leaders here in Paris for this particular summit, the security footprint, the posture is immense, and that should not surprise anyone. Climate policy is clearly a legacy item the White House wants to solidify for a president who has said previously that it poses an immediate risk to national security. So we should expect some sort of an accord from the countries gathered here, Chris, before the end of the conference, something actionable, not necessarily a treaty. Meanwhile, you should also expect the president to make use of the time in Paris to meet with Presidents Hollande of France and Putin of Russia, maybe even Erdogan of Turkey, with ISIS and the Syrian conflict high on the agenda. Of course, that's taken on a whole new level of importance in the wake of the Russian fighter jet being shot down by the Turks over complaints that the Russian aircraft violated Turkey's airspace. And you also probably remember, the folks at home certainly should remember, that goes back to the talks about de-escalation. We heard a lot about that, Chris, in the early part of the fall, and so expect the White House and the president's advisors in particular to try to tamp down the situation between Turkey and Russia and hopefully take what is clearly a volatile situation back down to a manageable level. Chris?
Kevin Corke reporting live from Paris.
So somewhere in the middle of that report, you may have noticed the news that it sounds like there's actually going to be some sort of agreement on climate change announced at this Paris conference this week. But you probably also noticed that almost the entire report was about terrorism and the Paris attack and the negotiations between NATO and Turkey as a part of NATO and Russia after the downing of the Russian fighter jet by Turkey. Or anyway, as I discussed before I showed that clip, I also wanted to show a similar clip from ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos. I think this may be introduced by Martha Raddatz, but it's their reporter, John Karl, who gives a very similar report to what you saw from Kevin Corke on Fox News, where he doesn't say much about climate change at all. It's almost all about terrorism and the Paris attack overshadowing this climate change conference in Paris. Over in this final clip for the broadcast tonight here.
The effort to combat climate change is what is bringing all the world leaders here to Paris, but hanging over this entire summit is terrorism and the battle against ISIS. President Obama has said the very fact that this summit is taking place just 2 weeks after the attacks that rocked this city is, quote, a powerful rebuke to the terrorists. And according to President Hollande, this is the largest gathering of world leaders ever in Paris. Security appears to be higher here than at any time since the end of World War II. Terrorism will be on the agenda when President Obama and Hollande have a one-on-one meeting over dinner tomorrow night. Hollande is seeking unity and a stepped-up effort against ISIS, but in the wake of the shooting down of that Russian jet by Turkey last week, unity is a very tall order. Turkish Prime Minister Erdogan has refused to apologize, placing the blame on Russia for violating Turkish airspace, and Russia has slapped severe economic sanctions on Turkey. One of the subplots here at this summit is Prime Minister Erdogan has asked for a meeting with Vladimir Putin. They will both be here, but so far Putin has refused to even respond to that request. Martha?
Thanks, John.
So I guess that's something to look forward to this week, to see whether Prime Minister Erdogan of Turkey gets a meeting with Russian Prime Minister, no, he's actually President now, Vladimir Putin. I don't think there was much talk about the actual issue of climate change in that report from ABC, and there wasn't much in the one from Fox News Sunday. Hopefully the entire climate change conference won't be overshadowed by the issue of ISIS and terrorism. Hopefully there will actually be some discussion of climate change, which is a really important issue, especially if you look at things in more of the long term. I've been seeing a lot of discussions about some pretty devastating effects of climate change that are already starting to be noticeable in our current climate. And if you look at things over the next 25 to 50 years, the effects are going to be, much more important than any of these day-to-day political stories, or maybe even the whole threat from ISIS. That's what President Obama got in trouble for, just saying that climate change was even comparable to the threat from terrorism at some point, and saying that this Paris conference was going to be a rebuke to ISIS. That was also talked about in a lot of ways on or as being out of touch by President Obama amongst the right wing, and especially on Fox News that I watched this week. But I expect to see more of that in the coming week, and hopefully we'll also see some actual discussion of the threat from climate change with this big conference coming up, and maybe even some agreement, as was reported in those last clips I showed. Those are the last clips for tonight. I hope you enjoyed the 26 clips I picked out for you, and I'm glad I was able to broadcast the show without all the technical glitches that I fixed over the last week. You can see I have the microphone here, but it's in a rotation that I don't think it's even possible to hit me in the face, so that won't be happening. But that was a kind of a humorous fail clip I could upload on myself over the week, and then I was able to even make this Fox News bias clip, an edited, narrated, scripted video on Friday about the Fox News coverage of the shooting in Colorado Springs at the Planned Parenthood clinic, failing to mention the part of the Planned Parenthood statement about the poisonous environment created by extremist rhetoric, or I can't remember the exact quote, but those are my last couple videos. If you haven't seen them, you can go watch those on my channel. If you want to help support my work here and my ability to make videos without relying on advertising revenue from YouTube, you can become one of my patrons. I put links down in the video description to become a monthly patron. I think I have 56 patrons that are giving me about, was it $330 a month? I'd like to get that up to $400, which would be $100 per weekly show, since it takes me about 6 to 8 hours of preparation plus broadcast time. That would be close to minimum wage, and I could get rid of some of the ads maybe, but also you can make direct contributions to my channel through YouTube fan funding by clicking on this little eye in the corner here. If you float your mouse over there, if you happen to have any interest in doing that. Otherwise, I should be making more videos, edited, narrated, scripted videos. Maybe I'll have a chance to make one this week about the felony I almost had to commit in order to capture my video because of the weird provision of the DMCA about anti-circumvention technology. I'm hoping to make that video this week, so watch for that. Otherwise, I will be back sometime around 6 p.m. Pacific, which is Greenwich Mean Time minus 8 hours, next week for LiberalViewer Sunday live clip roundup. I'll pick out the best clips next week from the Sunday morning news analysis shows. I think there may be a new Saturday Night Live next week. No Bill Maher, but if there's a good clip from Saturday Night Live, I'll include that. And I appreciate all of you who join me live. I appreciate all of you who watch as a recorded show and leave me comments about what you think about the news. Give me a thumbs up down there, and that also helps out. And I guess until next week, I'll be seeing all of you around the internet.